let's go ahead and get into things. Let's start things off right with complaining. So, for those who are here and don't know, I adore Magic the Gathering as a card game, and I also adore Commander as a format. I've been playing it on and off for the last few years, and my first introduction to it was way back in Shards of Alara block, whenever a friend of mine handed me his Progenitus EDH deck for me to try after we were done playing in a Standard tournament. Speaking of which, Standard tournaments, you guys remember those? Do you guys remember when people played Standard? I remember when people played Standard. But there's a thing that comes with Commander as a format that I think we need to talk about. And it's a problem that's existed in Commander for a while now. So, for those of you who don't know, Commander has this little, tiny, small thing called Rule 0. Now, for those who don't know, Rule 0 is the idea of house rules. It's not really a hammered down definition, but basically, as Rule 0 in Magic has changed over the years, it really just means you can make exceptions to anything in the official rules as long as you have the approval of all the players involved. So they didn't just invent Standard on Arena? Weird, I know, right? But so long as you've got the approval of all the players involved, then Rule 0 can allow you to smooth out games. It also means that if you've got a problem with certain decks, certain archetypes, or anything like that, then you can ban those with Rule 0. If you don't like playing against decks that have tutors, so that, you know, everybody actually has to dig for their answers, as opposed to, well, I just casted Diabolic Tutor, I just casted Vampiric Tutor, I just casted Demonic Tutor for the umpteenth time and got my win gone. Gee, I wonder what happens. If you really crave variance in games, you can Rule 0 variance into your games that way. But here's the problem. Here's a handful of problems with Rule 0. It basically exists for only one purpose. It allows Commander to be an incredibly poorly defined format with parameters that are incredibly wishy-washy. As an example, I live in an area that is very, very dense with Magic card shops. I can go to a different shop every day a week and still find different shops to go to by the time I'm done there. Each city tends to have 2 or 3, if not more, as you get closer to the Atlanta region. And this comes with some benefits. I'm never really lacking for a group of people to play Magic with, or a group of people to play Commander with. I am lacking in places to play Standard and Modern and also Pioneer. I wonder if there's any format of Magic that's taken over everything and made it harder to find those formats, even in a place where it shouldn't be that difficult. You know what? I don't know. I don't know if there's anything in Magic the Gathering that has made it more difficult to play 60-card formats ever. But going to these different card shops, it does give me a small advantage over a lot of other people when it comes to having fun with this game. I don't need to find a consistent play group to play Magic the Gathering. I can just go into a random shop, sit down into a pod, and then I'm fine. And here we run into our first problem. So, when you are at a shop, the power level of everybody at that shop eventually starts to kind of even out when it comes to Commander. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's say that you've got a handful of people at that shop that play really, really obnoxiously strong decks. And one of two things will happen because of those people. Either those couple people will find it incredibly hard for them to find groups they can slot into easily, or the entire shop will power themselves up around that group, and suddenly everybody's got decently powerful decks. Whether or not they're playing CDH, they'll have strong decks to play at that shop. It's going to be one, the other, or both. You're going to have people either going towards that group of people who have the strong decks and building up to them, or those people are going to get ostracized and everybody else will build down. Now, This means that if you're playing at one shop, after a few months, you're going to end up finding yourself in the flow of that shop, and you'll be able to very easily play games with anybody there without any issue. Problem solved. But again, let's say you happen to go to multiple different shops. Let's say you have a job that allows you to travel the country, and so you find yourself at different places all the time. What do you do now as you start walking into shops with different people with different power levels? I started noticing this problem when I would play with friends of mine online. I had a Cathril deck, and Cathril is not the strongest commander in the world. She's not. But Cathril basically says that when she comes into play, add a 1/1 counter onto a creature for every keyword in your graveyard. And for every keyword in your graveyard, add a counter that has those keywords onto a creature. She gets the 1/1 counters, and then another creature gets all the special abilities. So I build her Voltron. I'd spend the first couple turns ramping up into a tutor spell. I'd use Buried Alive to throw Zatalpa, our favorite precon infection card, and Basara, Tower Archer, and another card all into the graveyard to give Cathril all the keywords, make her a 12/12, and then she would sit there with Hexproof and Indestructible, and I'd basically go, so, what are you going to do now? And then smack a player in the face for Flying Double Strike and Trample, and that would basically be it. 22 commander damage to each person one-on-one. It's one of the things that turned me off of playing Voltron, because it was such a linear, dumb strategy. But then we ran into a problem. This was a perfectly reasonable deck to play at my local card shop, where there's one player who's really, really powerful and tries to say that his decks aren't actually that strong, and so everybody who wants to play with him ends up having to power up their decks around him. And so now we have a deck that is really, really strong because it's got to play in this faster meta. I hop online with a couple of friends, and suddenly everybody's looking at me, wondering, what in the crap did you bring to this table? It's not the strongest deck in the world, but it is a deck that is scaled to my shop. And the decks that my friends were playing were not scaled to that. They were scaled to their shops, where people were playing at a much slower pace. Games weren't ending on turn 4 or 5, they were ending on turn 8 and 9. This created a bit of a power imbalance. I had to actually start building weaker decks of mine so that I could play with this group of friends and still have a fun time. But why does this happen? Why is this a thing? Well, this phenomenon exists because Commander is a poorly defined format. If you don't have a consistent play group for yourself, also thank you for the follow, the unending, if you don't have a consistent play group for yourself, then you're going to find that you're always having to mix and match yourself to various groups of people playing this game. Now, that's not a problem. Most of you could do with learning how to be a little more social. Let's be honest, I could as well. But my solution to this is not a solution that everybody has access to. It challenges... Wait, the unending... I don't give a fuck about what you're saying. Literally at all. I'm talking about a card game right now. Fuck off. Anyway. I understand that you decided to not think about literally anything at all, except what you wanted to say in response to a video I made on my YouTube channel. I get it. Congratulations. I'm not talking politics right now, so you can go, leave, fapple the night away, do something with your lonely life. Oh, you don't care? Okay, then I don't care either. Boy, howdy, it's so easy to just hit the timeout button. Aw, man, look at that. Suddenly his messages disappear. What a shame. I'm trying to talk about trading cards. You're the one that brought politics into this. I don't want to talk about that right now. I want to talk about Magic the Gathering. I don't give a flying shit about your feelings. But it's a 2-minute-old account. Yep, 2-minute-old account, 2-inch long penis. So, if you don't have a consistent playgroup, Rule 0 ends up becoming a bit of a problem. Unless you can build multiple decks at multiple different power levels, which can take a little bit of money if you're not Aware, Magic the Gathering is a game that costs money. Also, Quethon, thank you for redeeming your points for an ooh. But when you are having to build all these decks to fit in with all these different play groups, that can be either really, really fun or create a bit of a problem. Now, in competitive formats, you don't really have this issue. In competitive formats, you've got a deck that is either strong enough to play at tier 1, 2, or 3 in those competitive formats, or you're not playing in those formats. It's simple as that. Now, there's another conversation that I've started a little bit on another video about how those formats are way too expensive. And yes, I know, I got that one comment from the guy who said, no, I play Soul Sisters in Modern, therefore Modern doesn't have a money issue. Despite the fact that almost every deck in Modern costs over $600 to $800, and the strongest decks cost $1,200. One of them costs $1,600. But let's pretend that format's not expensive, just because you personally can play a single deck that is less expensive than the other ones. I, too, play a less expensive deck in Modern, but I also have Hardened Scales. The fact of the matter is, Commander is a format that we're supposed to be able to get away from all that for. So I know there's people who are going to be like, aha, CDH is a thing. There's competitive Commander. I'm not talking about needing to drop $5,000 on a deck formats. Gibberish, thank you for redeeming your points for an OWO. But we run into another issue. As I bring up my problems with Rule 0, the fact that without a consistent play group, it's going to be very, very hard to slot in somewhere because nobody really has a consistent agreement on what is or isn't okay with Magic. Is Infect okay to bring to the group? Is Burn okay to bring to the group? Is Aristocrats okay to bring to the group? Does it need to not be running Grave Pact and Dictative Erebos so that people can play their creature decks? Is Combo okay to bring to the group? Is it alright for me to bring Thassa's Oracle and Demonic Consultation? Do you not like those cards because they're boring, or do you not like those cards because you don't like having to put counter spells in your deck? Which one is it? It's very, very hard to find a group of people who will always agree on these things unless you have a consistent play group that's willing to make compromises on those things. Which runs us into the next big problem. Rule 0 kind of shuts down any criticism of the Commander format. Now, I understand there's a default response to this. If you don't want to be social about Commander, then maybe this just isn't the game for you. I'm sorry, we don't need to be doing that. We don't need to be gatekeeping Magic from arguably people who've been playing it longer than anyone else. I'm just going to say this right now. There's almost always a chunk of people at a card shop who, without that card shop, would not have a social circle. They're not really adept at socializing with people. And that's an okay thing. We don't need to be telling those people that they're the problem when they're playing this game just like you and I are. So when we try to criticize problems in the Commander format or inconsistencies with the bans that are put in the Commander format, when we try to talk about that kind of stuff, if you immediately just default onto, then just Rule 0 it out, then why the fuck do we have a rules committee? Now, I understand some people might find this video to be in poor taste because of the recent passing of Shelton from the rules committee, and I understand that's definitely something that I'm not super thrilled about, especially after seeing his appearances on Tolarian Community College. Had a lot of respect for the guy. Adrenalinus, thank you very much for redeeming your points for fucking degen. But here's the thing. You can't hide behind Rule 0 to argue that problems don't exist in the Commander format. Commander is, at its very best, a broken format that only exists in any comprehensible way because we've agreed that it should exist. It's a fan-made format that Wizards got a hold of. Rule 0 also, unfortunately, it prevents the Rules Committee from banning certain problem cards. And not that Rule 0 prevents it. They can ban whatever they want without any input from anyone. Like, that's just a thing they get to do. But Rule 0 exists to basically create a paradox here. Let's go ahead and give an example of something. I've heard through the grapevine that Gaia's Cradle, for instance, was a card that would have been banned in Magic the Gathering except it's cost prohibitive for people to own it, so it's not banned in the Commander format, because somehow this is the one time where we care about cost in Magic. Company that's not supposed to care about the secondary market says what? Anyway, that card is apparently not something that would be in the spirit of the Commander format, or would not be allowed in the Commander format, except the cost of the card is too great for most people. Most people are not going to drop $600 to $800 on a single land, and they shouldn't. That's a ludicrous amount of money to spend on any one trading card that you're going to be playing. But now we run into a problem. With Rule 0, we can do things like allow proxies. You know, for all those people who don't want to spend a crap ton of money on a trading card game that only has a lot of value because we've all agreed it has value, those people that want to play the game and can't spend a lot of money on it can now print out proxies. So what's the rule we're setting out on proxies? Do we say, hey, you can only print out proxies for cards that cost $2 and under? Or are we saying proxy your entire deck as much as you want? Proxy all the tutors, proxy all of the really expensive reserve list cards, go ahead and put Survival of the Fittest in, go ahead and put Gaia's Cradles in, put all of that in your deck. If we have a format where that's allowed, now suddenly cards that the rules committee won't take out of the game, because they've agreed that these cards don't belong in the Commander format. Not really. They're not that fun to play against, and some of them are outside of the spirit of the format. Now, the one argument the Rules Committee has against things like Gaia's Cradle is gone, because the cards are now the price of a little bit of printer ink. Not even your printer ink. Just go to, like, UPS or something. Have their printers do it. Not only do you end up shutting down any criticisms of problems in the Commander format, but you end up being able to hide behind Rule 0 as a way to not interact with the format, to not do arguably your job in taking cards out of the format that don't need to be there. I know the argument that is almost always brought in, hey, we don't want new players to have to deal with this huge ban list and all this extra stuff that they have to learn for getting into the game. I don't buy that, though. I don't really buy that. New players get into card games all the time. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a ban list the length of some novels, and people still get into that game all the time. All you have to do is just make it to where the ways that people enter the format do not contain the cards that you are planning on banning. Simple as that. Most people get into Commander by picking up a pre-con at their local trading card store. As long as that doesn't contain any of the cards you're planning on getting rid of, looking at you, Sol Ring. Kidding, nobody's actually ever going to get rid of Sol Ring. But as long as you don't have those cards in the product that people are going to be learning the game with, then they're going to figure out about that ban list eventually, and it doesn't matter how long the damn thing is. It really doesn't anymore. Not at that point. But then we run into another problem with Rule 0. What is one of the first conversations had at the beginning of any Commander table ever? What power level is your deck? Now, again, in a competitive format, you only really bring your rogue decks, your tier 1, 2, and 3 decks, your stuff that you know is going to either work well against the meta or work well within the meta. But at a Commander table, we don't have that. We literally just have decks. Decks exist. That's it. That's the beginning and that's the end. Outside of CEDH, where we're back to using those tier 1, 2, and 3 and rogue analyses for decks, you just have an Aristocrats deck, or you have a Najeela deck, or you have a Landfall deck, or you have an Artifact deck. So how do you measure the power level of those decks? Not everybody can really agree on what power level is for Magic. Nobody's going to build a deck that has power level 1 through 5 because the people who... I need to go ahead and get something out of the way first. Maybe some people here don't know what power level is for Commander. And basically, power level is that there's a scale of 1 to 10. And your deck exists somewhere on the scale of 1 to 10. But the joke is that everybody's deck is a 7. Every deck is a 7. Every single Magic the Gathering deck is a 7. Every single one. And every person who has said their deck is a 7 is one of two things: stupid or a liar. I'm being honest right now. You either do not understand how to measure power level for something, or you are lying about the power level of your deck. Because there is no real way to quantify the power level of a commander deck. Some people say, oh, it's based on what turn your deck can do its thing, or how consistently it can do its thing, and on what turn. Is its thing winning immediately, or is it dirtling? The thing is, though, depending on the play group, these things change. Can your deck consistently do its 2 to 3 card combo on turn 4? Sure, but not if the player over there runs 25 interaction spells. What about if all 3 players at the table are running 25 interaction spells? Run more interaction spells in Commander. What if everybody around is being a responsible adult and they are bringing counter spells and modular destruction and all kinds of things needed to disrupt your strategy? Is your deck a power level 7 now? Is your deck a power level 7 against stacks? Is it a power level 7 against removal? Like, what is your deck a power level 7 against? There's 3 other people at the table. What I'm saying is, power level is its own conversation that I'll have to do in another video. But my gripe with trying to use power level at all is that it doesn't work. There's too many variables. The variables don't just exist within the 99 of your deck. They exist within the 99 of everybody else's deck as well. In a one-on-one game, these things are a little more quantifiable. My deck loses to control. My deck loses to mid-range. My deck does really well against tempo. But when there's 3 other players at the table, there's too many variables to accurately math out how strong your deck is. Or, even stranger, how strong your deck feels. So, what do you do when you have a deck that feels perfectly fine for your local play group, but it doesn't feel fine for the play group you've just sat down with? Well, you should just rule 0 to talk about it, right? But that's not going to happen, because you didn't know when you sat down to that table that this deck was a problem, because it wasn't a problem for every other play group you've been at. And they didn't know it was going to be a problem because it might be a deck they're not familiar with. Or, let's say, they're used to fighting a Dina Soulsteeper deck that doesn't have Exquisite Blood in it, and yours does. Now, suddenly, we've got a lot of disparity in what people are thinking is okay and what people are thinking is not. And now we run into another problem with Rule 0. Some people can have problems with something in the Commander format, but not be able to articulate it. And somebody's inability to articulate their problems with a format does not negate their feelings of problems within that format. Their inability to accurately describe how they feel about something doesn't take away the feeling they have when every subsequent game they're having is making them feel less and less like they want to continue playing this game that is supposed to be, might I remind everybody, the casual game everybody who plays Magic can get in on for a low cost, because it was originally built to be just the casual fun thing you did on the side. But there's another problem. Rule 0 only exists in casual Commander. Now we have another compounding issue. What is casual Commander? Why are we playing casual Commander? What is this thing? I've did a little bit of research before starting this video into some of people's problems with Rule 0 and some of their defenses for Rule 0, and there were some people who straight up just said, if everybody plays CEDH, nobody will have this problem. I don't think I can explain how batshit stupid of a comment that is. The Commander format exists as a casual format. CEDH existing is antithetical to Commander as a format. Now, I wholly understand that with any game, people are going to min-max it. It doesn't matter if it's single player, it doesn't matter if it's multiplayer, people will min-max the crap out of anything. But players have this strange propensity. It's something that I learned from playing classic World of Warcraft. Players have this affinity for min-maxing something to the point where they no longer have fun with it anymore. Think about it this way. Let's say you've got your commander deck, and it has 2 combos that win the game. One of them is Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation, and then another of them might be, I don't know, something cheap like Ivy Lane Denizen and Scurry Oak with a Concordant Crossroads. Like something little like that, right? And your deck is chock full of draw spells, interaction, and tutors. That's it. Your deck has no synergies. It has nothing except draw spells to get to the tutors to get to the combos, and interaction to defend yourself as you're getting to them. How many games with this deck are you going to have before you get bored of it? For some people, it's an infinite amount. Some people can do the exact same 2 cards a billion times, and it feels fine to them every time. Other people take apart their AC decks because they're too consistent and hand me the Tatiovas because I'm building AC and they don't want to deal with that shit anymore. Actual thing that happened with me. Mentioned I was building the deck and somebody was like, here, just have my Tatiova. I want it far away from me. Some people don't want consistency. They want variance. And then we run into the next problem. After a while, even variance gets boring and you start wanting consistency. And then what happens when everybody at your playgroup or everybody at your shop is on a different area of this cycle of wanting consistency versus wanting variance? And now suddenly everybody's arguing with each other before every game about what is or isn't casual or what is or isn't fair. And you see the issue? You see the issue? I'm not saying there's a guaranteed solution to this, because there's a final problem with Rule 0, and it's the worst problem with it. As long as casual Commander exists, which I think it should exist far more than I think CEDH as a format should exist, despite having played in that format as well. The problem with Rule 0, the biggest one, more than anything else, is that it's necessary. Just think about it right now. Can any one of you think of a catch-all solution, aside from literally playing a different format, for every problem I've listed? How do you solve players at different levels of experience? How do you solve players at different areas of their Magic journey? How do you solve players at different agreeances on how much interaction, what type of combos, what type of cards they're fine playing against? How do you handle cards that the rules committee will not ban despite saying this card should be banned? How do you handle cards entering Magic that people who have play tested the game said should never have entered in the first place? Looking at you, Hullbreacher. Also, hi, Hannah! We're in the middle of ranting about Magic. Thank you so much for the raid. How was Chudwatch? But how do you solve all of those problems? How do you solve nobody being able to agree on all of this? Well, you solve it with compromise. And unfortunately, Rule 0 is the only method we have right now of handling compromise in Magic the Gathering. We don't have to have that in Standard or in Pioneer or in Modern, because again, when you sit down to a table for those formats, you know what you're getting into. And to another extent, you don't have to have that problem in CDH, because sitting down at those tables, you know what you're getting into. But nobody wants the same thing with Commander in the way that it's experienced and loved by the most people. Casual people are the backbone of the Commander format. And unfortunately, none of us will ever be able to agree on everything when it comes to the Commander. So, while yes, Rule 0 exists to let Commander be a poorly defined format which comes with a myriad of issues, and yes, it doesn't work without a consistent playgroup very well, and yes, people hide behind it to shut down criticism for the Commander format, and yes, the Rules Committee gets to hide behind it to prevent themselves from doing their goddamn job, and yes, Rule 0 can create issues where people can literally say, hey, my deck only dies to aristocrat decks because I lose to sacrifice strategies, and I refuse to put Tatiova in the deck to solve that problem. And people can Rule 0 that out and become the strongest person at the table, requiring another Rule 0 conversation about why that's even fair in the first place. And what the fuck is a power level 7? All of these problems exist, and yet The worst one is that Rule Zero is needed. Without it, without those agreements, Commander's a broken format that doesn't work. I say this as somebody who has currently 28 Commander decks, all optimized and built to play at varying power levels. I have a low-level deck that is meant to play with newer players with Furja as the commander. I have higher-level decks like AC and Sheoldred, which are very hyper-linear strategies which exist to only do one thing. I have Savra as a stacks deck, so I can sit down at CEDH tables. I have decks for all of these different power levels. And even I've got to admit, Rule Zero ends up being necessary. It comes with a myriad of problems, but kind of like with Democracy, it is one of the worst forms of solving this problem. But it's also the best we've got. I know that was Churchill who said something similar to that, and that's not the greatest look in the world, but Democracy is one of the worst political systems except for all the others, was basically what he said. And that's kind of where I'm at with Commander. Rule Zero is one of the worst ways to solve all these myriad problems Commander has. But every other solution's probably worse. So, what do we do? I know people who are going to come into this, the comment section, and they're going to have vehement disagreement with what I've said about Rule Zero. They're going to have a ton of arguments about why it's perfect and it solves all their problems and everything. But the mere existence of other people in that comment section who are going to be disagreeing with you and disagreeing with me, well, that's its own Rule Zero conversation anyway. But I do look forward to seeing what the spirited debate is in that comment section. That all said, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below when this makes it up to YouTube. And as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here.